Thank you, Peter. All right. So welcome to the beginning of a disorienting Christian season called Holy Week. Today, many Christians, right, across the globe began the journey from triumphant entry into Jerusalem to supper, to betrayal, right? Yes? Right? And then to an execution, to actual factual deadness, to a resurrected life beyond the tomb. In the span of 7 days, we may feel all manner of emotions. I know I do. We may be transported to a time when we were feeling triumphant one day and maybe deflated the next, right? Or or maybe that only happens to me. I don't know. No, okay. Just want to make sure you're here with me. So as we continue in our own personal devotion to make space for the spectrum of human emotions that this week might inspire for you. Amen. You know, in 2019, when we were living in San Jose on St. John Street, right in downtown, we lived in this Victorian house. This microphone, I feel like it's gonna poke me or something. It's just coming at me and I can't push it back. We had this street view, a pretty big street view. We could see pretty much not only the street in front of us, but down a few blocks to the right and down a few blocks to the left. And so one morning, I should say, I was having a coffee. I was just looking outside the window, and I see two young men breaking into my car. And this is early in the morning, right across the street to the left. And so I'm just kind of there, like thinking, what am I going to do about this situation? And I'm one that does not like to call the cops. I just won't call the cops. If I could figure out a way to avoid calling the cops, I'm gonna figure it out. Now, these were two young black men, right? So I said, okay, I'm definitely not calling the cops, right? They're breaking into my 2006 Honda Civic. There's a young man already inside doing his thing under the steering wheel, and the other young man's just in front, kind of just looking out, right? And so I'm there continuing to have my coffee thinking, wow, man, the struggle is real out here, right? And I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, maybe I could grab their attention and be like, hey, that's my car, please, leave it alone. And so I'm waving and I'm kind of not screaming, but talking to them as if they could even hear me through the window. And I didn't get their attention. So I'm like, all right, man, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna go outside in the front porch, and maybe from the front porch, because I'm not trying to approach them to startle them, and then for them to react maybe in a way that's gonna get everyone just in a situation we don't wanna find ourselves in. And so I go outside the porch, and I'm still contemplating, man, and then I holler at them, I'm like, hey, and they turn around, the young man outside, the young man inside is still working on the ignition. So he's like, yeah? I'm like, that's my car. He says, oh, this is your car? This is your ride? I'm like, yes, it's mine. What are you doing? And they said, the Lord needs it. I go, we'll bring it back to you, homie. I was like, let me go grab the keys. Don't break my ignition, and you guys could take it for whatever you needed. I'm thinking, well, the Lord needs it. How am I supposed to respond to that, right? I go inside to get my keys because I'm actually going to give them the keys, and they took off running. And they left a note saying, now that we know this is your car, we're not going to mess with it. But, I'm thinking, well, please don't mess with the other cars too, right? So, You never know when the Lord might need something. Now, please, I'm not suggesting do exactly what I did, right? So, but if this story would have happened, you know, today, somewhere between verse 5 and 6, the cost would have been called and the story would end there. It would have. There would be no triumphant entry into Jerusalem because Jesus could not get the transportation he needed for the protest. So, of course, the rest of the day I'm thinking, man, what's Jesus riding on now? Right? They didn't take my car. But Jesus tells the disciples to tell anyone who presses them that the Lord needs it, right? And will send it back immediately. I'm thinking these young men, they knew their Bible very well, right? They had an answer and were ready. And I'm thinking, did they know I was a minister too? Probably. I mean, it was just, what a spiritual day, let's say. Now, at least from the scene we have in this passage, it does not appear that there is any immediate pushback, right? In fact, the people spread their cloaks on the road and put leafy branches on the road. There was a crowd of people who went ahead of the caravan and led the protest with shouts and chants, right? It seems as though every unnamed character of significance in this passage was with the movement. Everyone in this passage cried, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, right? Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. If there were any detractors or undercover agents, because there always are, they do not present themselves in this passage, in my imagination. So I ask myself, and I ask maybe all of you, are there times in your life when you feel compelled to do something otherwise strange because the Lord needs it? Consider the witness of people like Fred Hampton, right, who was an activist, who was the chair committee in Illinois for the Black Panther Party, or Fannie Lou Hamer, right, civil rights leader for American voting and human rights. While both of these people had distinct calls toward the movement for Black liberation, they both were committed to the people above all else, right? Hampton would often say in his speeches that he was ready to die for the movement. Hammer would say in hers that if I fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. I'm not backing up. She said that, right? Both of these people had strong and clear convictions about the world they knew all of us deserved. They believed in the absurdity of freedom. They believed and were compelled by something greater than themselves, weren't they? Freedom or God or fire shot up in their bones. Yeah? Now, it is a good thing to have a strong moral compass. It is, believe me. It is a good thing to be ready to be used for the movement for Christ. But I want to suggest that this must be a sustainable, consensual, loving relationship. But often, because we imagine God as the cop in the sky, as Octavia Butler reminds us, people are often manipulated into becoming pawns in a project without our consent, yes? We must notice religious manipulation when it emerges. One telltale sign of religious manipulation is a repeated refrain that the Lord needs it. That happened to me, I think, right? Even in this passage, Jesus promises to return the colt. Jesus does not expect to use the colt in perpetuity. There are boundaries and expectations. Amen? All right. Well, now, Jesus' long march to Jerusalem takes Mark's story from the marches of Palestine, from Palestinian society, to its center. Jesus prepares to enter the holy city not as a reverent pilgrim demonstrating allegiance to the temple, but as a subversive prophet challenging the foundations of state power. Mark 11-12 narrates Jesus' second as campaign of direct action. Those are my words. In the first campaign in Galilee, he confronted the status quo with his powerful actions of, do you remember? Exorcism and healing, right? Now he takes on the temple system and its stewards, the Jerusalem clerical establishment. This campaign, like the first, will culminate in polarization and rift. And will conclude with Jesus' withdrawal to further reflect upon his mission in the second sermon about revolutionary patience. Mark's Jerusalem narrative commences with the so-called triumphal entry, but I want to suggest that this is a misnomer. This carefully choreographed political street theater, as I like to imagine it, is designed to replicate messianic triumphalism. Y'all following so far? I like to check in, by the way. The scene would have been loaded with political significance for Mark's original readers. Jesus marches into the city accompanied by an army of peasants whose rapturous cries escalate the acclaim of Parliament into a full-blown revolutionary chant. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David. Images from the parade call to mind several biblical precedents. The colt signifying triumphant Judah, right? The return of the ark to Israel. The declaration of Jehu as upstart king. A royal processional hymn. And the fact that the parade began near the Mount of Olives would have brought to mind the final apocalyptic battle between Israel and her enemies spoken by Zechariah. I have scriptures for all these. Come after and ask for them. This theater also alludes to more recent events. It recalls the victorious military procession of Simon Maccabeus, the great guerrilla general who liberated Palestine from Hellenistic rule some 2 centuries before. According to 1 Maccabees, Simon entered Jerusalem with praise and palm branches and with hymns and songs. And there was an incident of messianic posturing contemporary to Mark as well. Midway through the Judean revolt against Rome, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, which Reverend Polly touched on last week, the guerrilla captain Menahem had marched through Jerusalem, heavily armed and like a king, in an unsuccessful attempt to become the sole leader of the rebel provisional government. But Mark uses all of these popular messianic images precisely in order to subvert them, I believe. This is the point of the odd story about commandeering, isn't it? A cult, commandeering a cult, which occupies fully half the parade narrative. Mark is consciously reorganizing the symbolism of this parade around a different image, which is expressly anti-military, right? Shout aloud, daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and shall command peace to the nations. That's from Zechariah. This king who has already projected Hellenistic power politics enters Jerusalem quite unarmed, though just as dangerous. The donkey also signified the ancient triumph of the tribe of Judah. It is not just a ride for Jesus. It represents a symbolic fulfillment of ancient dreams of Israelite sovereignty, and thus is tantamount to a declaration of independence. That's some pretty powerful political street theater, isn't it? It is, maybe, yes. You can say no, it's fine. Jesus' non-violent siege will not follow the messianic script that equated national liberation with the rehabilitation of the Davidic temple state. When Jesus comes to the temple, it is not to defend it, but to disrupt it. Now, in honor of Reverend Polly, I'm going to talk about Marcus Borg to remind us and repeat a little bit of what she talked about, because it's important information. You know, biblical scholars like Marcus Borg and Don Cruzan, in the book In the Last Week, a day-to-day account of Jesus' final week, argues that there were likely two processionals into Jerusalem, as we heard last week, right? But it's important to talk about it on Palm Sunday again, right? The feast of the Passover was a volatile time. It was a volatile time during which Jews celebrated their divine deliverance from the Egyptian empire of old, thus vocalizing their dissatisfaction under the current Roman boot. The Roman authorities thus feared that nationalist Jews would get stirred up with all that talk about freedom from bondage. So as Jesus was entering the city from the east, that way, all right, Borg and Croissant content a military cavalry led by the Roman governor Pilate may well have been arriving in the city from the west, bringing troops to the city to quell any overzealous Jews who might be calling for freedom from the Roman Empire. The imperial triumphus was both a civil ceremony and religious rite, held to celebrate publicly and to sanctify the achievement of Roman commanders who had won great military successes. Make no mistake, Roman soldiers marching into West Jerusalem during the high holy days was a show of force meant to intimidate any opposition to their occupation. Something that still happens today in that city to quell dissent, doesn't it? Don't have to probably name it. I'm just going to leave it there. Now you may be wondering about your artwork on the bulletin. So let's look at it. There in your bulletin. I'm sorry I didn't put images of palms or a donkey. Well, maybe there is a donkey, yeah. Is a painting I like. The one in the front is a painting by Belgian art. No, I'm sorry, inside your bulletin, not in the front. Artist James Ensor. That captures the political dynamicism of the Palm Sunday March. Now, David asked me what was going on in Brussels during that time, 89. Well, there was a huge anti-slavery conference going on during that time. And a lot of the people, of course, were not for it. So the entry of Christ into Brussels in 1889 was painted in 1888, considered a forerunner of the 20th century expressionism in its composition. A vast carnival mob and grotesque mask advances toward the viewer, right? A sea of frauds, clowns, and caricatures of public, historical, and allegorical figures, including Belgian politicians and members of Ensor's family. Nearly lost amid the teeming throng is can you see Jesus? Haloed Christ on his donkey. It's circled there in yellow for you to see. Mostly ignored, a precarious, isolated visionary amidst the herd-like masses of modern society. Artwork, the power of artwork. There's not enough of it these days, in my opinion. Now, in the front of your bulletin is Joe, I can never say his last name, Pelletier's American Fundamentalist, which was painted in 2004, is a contemporary representation of Ensor's work. It is a searing critique of the political influence of American Christian dominionism. Note Bush and Cheney in the upper right with Baghdad burning behind them, while banners praising John Winthrop, John Nelson Darby, Calvin Francis Schaeffer, and Rush Limbaugh are paraded at left and at upper left. Osama bin Laden and other notorious terrorists watch from the windows. That's what happens when you let me in charge of images in your bulletin. Which I have never been in charge of before. So, in conclusion, I'll end with this. We need to undomesticate Palm Sunday in our churches, I believe. Jesus was staging a kind of counter-demonstration. While Pilate rode into the city on a military stallion, Jesus entered on a borrowed donkey. Symbolized sovereignty, but also Zechariah's promise that Yahweh would one day banish the war horse forever. The procurator claimed that Pax Romana, the Nazarene, a Pax Christi. Pretty subversive stuff, personally, isn't it? And our churches have the habit of recreating that demonstration in our Palm Sunday liturgies. But to really represent this gospel story in our world, thanks to scholars like Borg, we need to recontextualize its symbols into a political moment and replace our witness back into public space. Amen. That's not my watch.
It's that funny little piece of Velcro.
I was about to go back in my seat and start singing, but I forgot people get to comment and reflect. We get to talk. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying I forgot. All right. Amen and amen.